Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. We've recently launched our Patreon page, which can be found at cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon. If you aren't familiar with Patreon, it's an easy way for those who are interested in this show to help out by simply pledging a small amount each month in sponsorship. Now that could be as little as $5 a month, which is about £3.80, or as much as you like. You will enable us to dedicate more time creating more content to help you, including videos, more blog posts, and even more shows. So if you can, head over to cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon and get involved. In this episode, we have something a little different for you. We're coming to you from NDC London, and I'm joined by Steve Gordon and Jon Galloway. And today we're going to be discussing the current state of .NET and its future. And some of these questions have been submitted by you, the listeners. So firstly, thank you for taking the time out between the talks to come and talk to us today. If you could do a quick round robin to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what it is you're doing.
Sure. My name's Jon Galloway. So I'm here I'm speaking about ASP.NET Core. I work for Microsoft. I've been there almost 10 years, and my current job is I work for the .NET Foundation. So a lot of people kind of nod their head and go, oh yeah, neat, what's that? So there's actually, .NET Foundation is a separate nonprofit that is not owned by Microsoft. Microsoft helped start it and they donate to it, but it's actually a separate, legal entity and everything. And so we support open source .NET. And when Microsoft has developers that are contributing .NET code, they're actually donating that code. They're contributing that code to the .NET Foundation. So it's a growing. It's been around since 2014, and we're doing a lot to kind of ramp that up. So I've already started rambling. That's it's something I'm passionate about. But that's me.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm Steve Gordon. I'm a senior .NET developer. I work for a company called Magix down in the south of the UK. We do mainly software as a service recruitment products, sort of engaging employers with professionals in the right industries. And I'm here talking about HTTP client and HTTP requests in .NET Core, which is something close to our heart at Magix. We're doing a lot of microservice development, and we're finding that that's a very important piece of that is how we communicate between those services.
Sure. So, as well, to go with a slightly different way that we do the show, normally I start with, so tell me about X, Y, and Z. But what we're going to do today is I've got three target areas to talk about, which is Core, .NET Framework, and Blazor. As I said earlier, these are questions that have been submitted by the listeners as well as some from myself. I think we'll start in a chronological order as such, and we'll start with .NET Framework. And we've seen the rise of Core over the last couple of years, and a lot of people have banged drums and claimed that Framework's dead, everyone's got to be a .NET Core developer, which it's not strictly true, because Framework's not dead, it's baked into Windows. But is it feature complete? Is it something that we can only expect security updates and patches from now on, or are we going to see anything new coming along?
Well, I've had to kind of study the official wording on this. There's some blog posts. I definitely recommend reading the blog posts for the kind of official stuff. What we found is because Framework, it ships with Windows, it's supported with Windows, and we can't, if there's something new or something if there's a problem or something in it, if we ship a feature that ends up breaking people, it affects billions of people, and we can't fix it really quickly. So it's heavy. Whereas .NET Core is lightweight. It's people that are using it are like the way it's distributed can be updated quickly, and the people using it are okay with that. With rapid innovation, things moving quickly, all that. So really, from what they've said, the focus is on not breaking people with .NET Framework. So sure. If the people that are using .NET Framework want stability, they want something that's that they can rely on not changing and not being kind of fast moving and crazy. They want something slow and stable. So from what I've my best memory from studying that blog post is the focus is on not breaking you, on moving slowly, There will be updates to it, but the focus is on things like security. If there are features, it's features that are kind of implemented slowly and carefully. And, like you said, .NET Framework shipping on Windows, the focus is, hey, maybe there's some big new feature for Windows. I wouldn't be surprised to see that light up in .NET Framework. But again, not moving quick, not breaking people is kind of a focus there. So I expect to see new features, including new security-related features, but it's not going to be a lot of activity.
Sure.
And as consumers of it, we've got two big products that are built on .NET Framework. We are now starting the move to kind of break those monoliths apart and start to build with microservices, purely because of the rapid growth or the rapid change of new features coming out. .NET Framework's great, it's stable, but there's a lot of innovation in terms of performance and sort of building these microservice architectures, API architectures that we can get quicker by going over to .NET Core and Docker and sort of moving with those new technologies.
Some of it too is if you look at it, .NET Framework was shipped as this big monolith. There's one version installed on your machine. If we ship an update and you've got 50 applications running in your enterprise and 49 of them work great with it and one doesn't, you're still sunk, right? And we've had things where we've shipped things over Windows Update the day that taxes were due in the United States that broke software that processed tax applications. So, the risk reward is really big, whereas .NET Framework is designed for side-by-side. It's designed for lightweight, package-based, self-contained, all these sorts of things, running in containers. So it's things where the impact of shipping something that's, rapid release with a new feature that may work for a lot of people. In the case of a .NET Core thing that works for 49 applications and not that one, self-contained, installation and you're done, or ship something in a Docker container or whatever. So it's really the design, because .NET Framework dates back over 15 years and .NET Core is kind of designed for, this modern rapid software delivery kind of thing. So
sure. So one of the key points that you both touched on was the cadence of .NET Core. Everything is fast-paced. Let's get a new release out, and just as we're getting our head around 2.0, there was 2.1, there's new features for that. Like, it's 2.2 now, and I've just sat through Damien Edwards' talk, who goes, here's 2.2, but here's all the stuff that's coming in 3 as well, which
right.
Actually what we're doing in 2.2 is better in 3, so maybe wait for 3.
Yeah.
Eventually, I would assume that Framework will drop out and Core maybe come into Windows. Do you think that that's maybe a possible threat, that once it becomes the framework that's in Windows, that the cadence would slow down?
The cadence of .NET Core?
Yeah, because there's obviously, as you talked about, there's that critical support for businesses and people out there that are using those frameworks.
I sure hope not. And I think that, like I was saying before, the kind of architecture, the way things are built now is for not having this one monolithic install. And so really kind of the focus with .NET Core is rapid, like yearly or more releases. So I think really that you are going to, I don't expect to see things kind of slowing down and it becoming like tied to Windows releases. Also because of the way that like we light up things with .NET Core. So for instance, Windows support in .NET Core is kind of more like plug-in and extensibility versus shipping one big .NET Framework thing. You know what I mean? So it's something where it's a lot more loosely tied to Windows. So I sure hope not. As much as it is dizzying to try and keep up with the change in .NET Core, we're in an age now where technology is just continuing to advance. Web development goes so fast. The cloud, all the different cloud providers are shipping things all the time. You can't slow down at this point.
No. And we're competing with the JavaScript developers out there. They get a new framework every 4 hours. So we've got to have something new to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I enjoy the pace. I enjoy the new things that are coming out, and we like to be able to take advantage of those as quickly as we can. So we're building two projects now. I'm trying some stuff in preview 2 of .NET Core 3 as well. But I talk to developers that are a bit frightened by that rapid pace. And to them, I just say, well, pick the long-term support, pick 2.1, and you've got a steady platform that you can build against and you can learn about. If there's a feature that you desperately need then that comes out in 2.2 or 3.0, then you can look at moving, but you don't have to follow it as rapidly as we are necessarily. But if you're building the services we are, or similar to the way we are, where you've got these microservices, you can pick and choose. We want the fastest HTTP communication, which was improved in 2.2, so we've chosen to upgrade our services to that. But if you don't need that, maybe don't bother. And we have a mix. I think we've still got some 1.0 stuff kicking around that probably needs updating.
That's really wise. What he's pointing out there is, we're attracted to learning the new exciting things. We're all here, like we're scribbling down notes as Damien's talking about the future, but really it does come down to features. And so you can skim the list of here's the features and you can say, those are all nice, but I'm okay with what I've got. That's just great. That's, like you said, stick with the LTS and it's going to work just fine for you.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So if I'm a framework developer and I'm sitting here thinking, do I need to go and learn this core stuff? Is there any merit for me moving to core because framework's going to be around long term? Is it something you would suggest that people go out and definitely get involved with?
I would encourage it, purely because it depends on the technologies you're working with. But if you're maintaining an existing application on .NET Framework, you maybe don't need to worry about suddenly upgrading it. But for us, we've seen that the microservice pattern works well. It enables us to improve our product quicker and deploy things quicker, and bring those changes to the customers quicker. And so we're now on the focus of, well, what bits can we break out that are sensible services that we can iterate more quickly, take advantage of the requests per second throughput that we can get with .NET Core, and doing those kind of things. So I think for me, it feels like it's the right time for people to start upskilling on this stuff and at least being aware of the possibilities. It doesn't mean you have to jump ship immediately to it, but it feels like that's where the future is.
Yeah. No, I worked in companies that are still running 1.1 of framework, and you go in and you go, have you heard about core? And they're like, we're not sure about even upgrading to 2.0 of framework. Never mind going to core. And I think that a lot of developers out there might struggle with that and the fact that they can't push their business or the company that they work for in that direction just yet. But in my opinion, it would be worth actually going out and looking at that.
My thought with it is there's two parts to the question. One is your applications, and the second is what you learn as a developer. And for applications, people it is hard to recommend upgrading, like taking working framework code and moving it to core. That's hard. I mean, there's ways to do it, but that's not easy. Starting new projects, we're recommending core for just about everything, right? And for you as a developer, I do feel like if you're able to build on ASP.NET Core, hey, it's the same APIs now. It's not like it's this whole brand new crazy thing. It's your C#, your VB, it's your code that you already know how to write with some minor changes, and now you can run it on Linux, and now you can run it on a Mac, and now you can develop you've got all these new features. So really I think too, like I talked to developers that were like, I watched all your demos and I'm used to Visual Studio and things being easy, and you're showing me these crazy demos with command lines and all this stuff, and that looks really hard. And, I think that's a failure on our part, is we showed, hey, look at this crazy new stuff. But you know what? You can go into Visual Studio and you can go file new project, and basically the same workflow you're used to still works. You can build an MVC application, and you might not have even thought much about it being core,
Yeah. I think I remember when core first came out, and I started seeing all these demos that you're talking about, and it was a bit like a time warp back to when the .NET Framework road trip was going around, and it was showing you .NET, and I remember the guy coming in and going, look what you can do, we've got this IDE, but here's Notepad. And then he got the command line up, and he compiled the application. You think, right, okay, yeah. And I was a VB6 developer at that time, and I was like, well, I quite like my IDE. And then once you actually got into it, you realize you could do everything in Visual Studio. And then I think the flags that were flying were, use command line, use VS Code. It doesn't get in the way. It doesn't do anything for you. And I think that's quite a shocking thing for us .NET developers that are so well looked after, because you go and look at some of the other development languages IDs, and they're not quite as user friendly. They don't do as much hand holding as Visual Studio. And I think that scares people a little bit.
Yeah, I think, there's a thing where .NET was very closely built with Windows and IIS and Visual Studio, and it was all kind of one big ball of mud, and SQL Server, right? And now it is nice that you can break these things apart. You can build .NET on a Mac in Sublime, whatever they do these days, and you can deploy it to Linux, and you do have it's .NET can be its own little thing. But if you're comfortable on Windows, SQL Server, Visual Studio, deployed to IIS, that all still works, And so I feel like we've done a bad job. We keep saying, look at this crazy stuff you could do, and that's scary. You can do what you're doing right now and just tick the box where it says core, and, most of it, there are changes. I don't want to, make it paper over it too much, but it's pretty close. The experience is pretty close.
Yeah, and it gives you a little bit more freedom of choice, I think, to use whatever system you want to build your code, because I work in a team where I use JetBrains Rider. I work on Windows. I've got members of the team that work on Macs and they use VS Code or they use one of the other editors, and yet this all goes into the same repository. It all works. It works on all the different laptops. Some of the JavaScript developers, we've had issues with working on their Macs because of how they were working, but we were able to do things and get around that. So it is very exciting that everything is available to everybody now.
Yeah. I mean, everything we're building on Windows desktops, but we're deploying quite happily to Linux containers, and everything works. There are quirks that date time caught us out at some point. There's different time formats for those things you have to watch out for. But as a rule, it's really easy just to build in the environment you're used to, but start taking advantage of new technologies for deployment.
Yeah, I've got a Mac that is running Windows 10, that was running Docker, that was running SQL, the Linux version, to then talk to .NET Core. So it was a case of, let's get everybody on one machine and use all that technology all at once.
Right.
Oh, so with Core, we're looking at sort of target platforms. .NET Framework targets Windows. Mono targets Windows, Mac, and Linux. .NET Core targets everything, and including some of the Samsung devices. Raspberry Pi will do it. Blazor using Mono targets the browser via WebAssembly, and there are IoT devices that are running .NET as well now. What's next for .NET? Are we going to see satellites being run by .NET? I will not be writing any code to do that sort of thing. But are there other platforms that are in the sights for .NET to sort of take over?
Honestly, I feel like a lot of it's just organic. There was no master plan of hey, let's get Blazor running in the browser. It was a few years ago, Steve Sanderson doing a crazy demo at NDC, and he's like, check this out. And the next thing you know, they're here teaching a workshop about, a product that's going to ship. So I feel like it's more the flexibility of, hey, this is a compiler, and, it'll run on just about everything, and letting people kind of take it where it goes. I've on Kickstarter, I've backed a Meadow project, and that's this IoT tiny little device and inexpensive. It's fun to see where people take it. I honestly, I don't know. I don't know where it's going next.
I think the possibilities seem to be fairly endless, but we're rather dull in the fact that we're just building APIs and back-end services. So if we can run those in Docker, we're happy. But all the new cool stuff does look interesting. Blazor, I'm keen to have a play with. I was chatting to one of the developers on the team about that, and I really want to get trying it out. But I don't do much front end now. I do APIs and things. So I've got to engineer a front end into one of our new services.
Yeah, and I've always wanted to have a go at building the little robots. I'm trying to think what the little shields and things were called. Little computers like Raspberry Pis and things like that. And my sort of caveat to me saying, I can't do it because it doesn't support C#.
Right.
It doesn't support .NET.
Like Mindstorms.
So I was like, I'll do that at some other point. I'll go and sort of dig out my Java skills, maybe write something at some point. But now I've got no excuse at all to not give it a go. So that is quite exciting.
One of the benefits, I think, from my perspective on where it's going and the platforms you're targeting with .NET now is that it's pushing the team to work on performance and figure out how they can run on those. And then we just reap the benefits of that in the areas that we're working in and the platforms we're running on as well.
Yeah.
Right. If you can make something run well on a tiny Docker container, that's you've got tons of Docker containers on one server, or can run on a Raspberry Pi, you've got to care about things like memory and allocations, and then that bubbles up to everywhere. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, one of the things I've just been looking at is span of T and the memory of T stuff, because we've got a lot of Docker containers. We tend to just scale them horizontally if we need to scale for volume of what we're processing. But I've just been looking at how much I can reduce allocations of things just by trying those new features out, working with the pipelines features. Yeah. That's all there. You don't have to take advantage of it. You don't have to learn all the new stuff, but it's proving like a very powerful way that we can actually reduce the amount of scale we need, and we can run a lot more for a lot less. And I think that's a real benefit for our development teams.
And that is a feature you talk about. Even if you are developing, everything's going to run on Windows. You still can, your applications by using .NET Core can take advantage of those modern features, and you can save money. You can, what I mean? You can get better performance. You can use a lot less memory just by, using those modern features.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think using Core now, because you can build it, put it on Linux, your hosting is so much cheaper because you're not paying for all that, all those Microsoft licenses that you've got to buy.
Buy a few, though.
Yeah. Well, we've got to keep Microsoft in business.
That's right.
So the original tagline for .NET was 22 languages and one platform. How do you think that holds up now? Because I think some languages have dropped out. There's been some new languages come in. And is it like all the languages in every platform now?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm pretty much pure C#. I ventured into some F#. We've recently sort of tried some stuff in that, but most of my day is spent C# code, and that's where I'm very happy. But that's just iterating so quickly as well now. The new releases of the language features that are coming out in C# 8. There's lots of fun stuff, even if you might not get bored even in the language you are happy and familiar with.
Sure.
Yeah, that's back when .NET was first new. You're right. There was Boo. There was all kinds of languages, and it was fun. People were really kind of being kind of playful and just throwing ideas out there. It does seem like VB and F# kind of are different ends of VB, very very approachable, and I started in VB6 also, and VB.NET was a very kind of nice, easy. It was readable, and after getting used to C#, I keep seeing all the kind of features. C# keeps being very wisely evolved. To me, there's a lot of powerful features coming in, but it doesn't. It still has kind of kept that C sharpness. Like so. So it feels like it's pretty hard to compete with C# in terms of a powerful, pretty readable language that keeps getting all this magic. I've played with F#. I've never gotten it's always like, oh, that's good. But now I'm going to go back to my C#. Safe yeah. Speaking of the different languages, I've seen. I think Alexander Mutel is XOOFX, I think, on Twitter, and he's been working on this Stark compiler, and it's inspired by the Midori project. And he's basically he's building something that's a little bit more like Rust, and he's compiling directly to assembly, or I don't know. He's doing some crazy stuff, and it made me happy to see that. I would like to see people building more kind of like DSLs or interesting languages, especially now that Rosalind's out there, and I don't know.
Yeah. And that sort of segues on to one of the my hot topics, which is VB.NET. Now, my understanding of VB.NET was it was one of those languages that was put in there to segue as VB Classic developers, or VB6 or 3 or whatever you were using, into the .NET world, because you went from VB6 to VB.NET, and then you grew up a little bit. Just alienated some of the listeners, and you became a C# developer. And every time that Microsoft said, we're not going to do VB.NET anymore, the world exploded and went, no, we need this. And Core came out and went, we're only supporting C#. And then as of version 2, it's Microsoft's gone, yeah, we've got VB.NET. So was that not Microsoft's chance to go, yeah, we're not going to do that, and tough, and to sort of force the hand a little bit?
It's interesting. I definitely can't speak for any kind of nefarious strategies on Microsoft's part. I started, like we were talking earlier, with VB. It's one thing I guess I noticed personally is the syntax of C# at first, with all those curly braces and semicolons, was at first a little scary, but after a little bit, it's not that much different. And I feel like that's maybe a difficulty, is that VB and .NET or VB and C# are not that different. So I don't know. It is true that whenever something changes, there's like a silent, huge crowd of VB developers, and they're not speaking up, and there aren't huge VB conferences and all that. But as soon as something changes like this, there's a billion angry comments, So there are people that are doing their day job. I speak at conferences, and a lot of people will say, "Oh yeah, I'm a VB developer," but they're just not vocal. So I think it is cool that it exists, and .NET is this kind of runtime that can support multiple languages is good. I think from Microsoft's point of view, as far as the support people don't think about is the shipping, all the other stuff that comes with VB support. Like, you need, okay, now you need templates, file new project templates, and you need to maintain them, and you need to have all the, scaffolding, and you need to have all the, so there's a lot of more baggage that comes to language support than just saying, hey, we're going to ship a newer version of it. So I don't know. I think with any of this stuff, it's just driven by numbers, and if there's demand for VB, and especially as we're kind of there is more innovation going on with .NET Core, then if those numbers of VB developers are going to be moving to Core, they're going to need their language to come with them. So
yeah, I see it the same way. I see it as a positive thing. If the community out there needs it, Microsoft have recognized that, and then they've chosen to kind of follow what the community need. I did the exact same path. VBNet was my gateway drug into .NET, and I think my issue was I was trying to find examples of things, and everything was in C#. So typically you'd go to a VB.NET to C#, transcoder type thing on the web, and you'd go, okay, great, now I can do it. And then in the end I was like, it's probably quicker just to learn the right place to put these curly braces and semicolons.
Yeah, I did VB6, did VB.NET. In my own time, and my first development job professionally that I got paid for was C#. And on my first day, I opened it up and thought, what the hell is this? And I remember vividly, I wake up in cold sweats saying to the senior dev, how do you declare a string in C#? Because when you look at it now, it's not that different. But
at the time,
when you come from VB, it's worlds of
There's
worlds
enough
apart.
noise in there that it looks a lot different.
Yeah, you got all that syntactical sugar that's in there, and I think as John mentioned, eventually you don't see it. And to quote the Matrix, I no longer see that. I see the woman in the
You're right.
dress.
You don't think of it. One other thing for me that I do remember in moving from VB to C# is that C# feels a lot more JavaScripty, and it's different, but I mean the kind of overall the semicolons and curly braces and the structure of the code feels more JavaScripty, and I do remember that being nice. It's like once I was writing C#, writing JavaScript didn't feel like this huge mental shift that it did before moving from VB to JavaScript. That was they're so different.
I always refer to .NET as pretend programming because I did a C++, Sam's Teach Yourself in 24 Hours book. And I wrote something about 6,000 lines of code in C++, and it opened the command prompt to put hello world, and I thought, no, that's not for me.
No thanks.
I'm going back to .NET and putting those little braces in and things. Right. It made me feel like I was actually writing real code rather than the VB stuff. But I'll stop hating on VB for a little bit now. So back to Core is why is Core moving away from its original plan of cross-platform with version 3? Because we're seeing now targeted packs for WPF and WinForms and things like that, and it's sort of diverging off that a little bit.
Yeah, I understand that thought, but that's not really what it is. I feel like more the idea of .NET like this it's going everywhere, right? It's moving to all these different platforms, including Windows. And on Windows, there's been this kind of separate world of modern Windows development and, .NET Core. And the two have not, the modern Windows desktop development wasn't able to take advantage of what was in .NET Core. So this is more about like being able to just light up things. Like, hey, if you're building if you've got a WPF app, and you want to use .NET Core, it's more about like taking advantage of or lighting up, without them being so. The big difference I feel like is they're not baked in together. It's not like, hey, here's the next version of .NET Core now has, it's got all these Windows features. It's more like, because of these desktop packs, if you want to use .NET Core and WPF or WinForms or whatever together, you can do that. So sure. I don't know. It's hard to articulate, but I feel like reading through those posts and looking at the little Lego block looking diagrams, it feels like, oh, okay, these are just making these things work together better. It's not that .NET Core is becoming a Windows focused thing.
Yeah, I don't do much Windows Dev or any Windows Dev these days. So from an outside perspective, it just feels like it's the opportunity to give the new cool toys to the kind of the platform Windows developers. And if it's done in the right way, as you say, if it doesn't tie the things together, so that .NET Core can still keep going at the pace it's going, and the innovation can continue, that's good for kind of the .NET web devs. I think it should be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm excited too with the .NET Core 3 support for WPF and WinForms. And you do have a lot of applications. They're never going to move off WinForms. They're large applications. They work well. And migrating existing working code to another code base is hard, and a lot of time it doesn't work. That was one of my early software developer experiences of migrating something from, I don't know, Power Builder to VB6, and the project failed. I ended up leaving the company. I talked to somebody a year later, and they're like, yeah, they rolled that back. They're using the Power Builder thing. And, so migrating existing code, super hard. But if instead I can take my WinForms app, and now I can take advantage of much better performance and these modern features, that's all, everybody wins. That's good.
Yeah. And I think that as long as Steve said, that it doesn't slow down Core, then that's great, because I think you go and look at the diagrams that have been put out there for the WinForms and the WPF support, is that there's that clear divide between it's almost like it's an us and them type thing, and it's like, well, as long as there's that divide that it's not, Core isn't dependent on these extra libraries, I think we're probably good with that. And if we're now going to be supporting these GUI applications, is there now scope for maybe polyfilling some of these APIs and giving cross-platform GUI support then?
It's a question that everyone asks. It's a question that I asked. Every time I have seen any official word from Microsoft has been, we have no commitment or plans on building cross-platform UI. I honestly, before I was at Microsoft, I was building .NET, and I was watching every release of Mono, and I was building, desktop applications with Mono on Linux, and there's definitely a demand for it. If you look at people are building all these Electron apps, Electron is crazy. We're running Chromium, we're running Node, we're running, it's this crazy science project that kind of works, but if you actually are developing things on Electron, or if you look at the Electron code, it's crazy how they make it work. So I can definitely see advantages to, the Blazor team built this prototype called Blectron, which is basically, they took Electron and Blazor, and so they're running Blazor code, so it's C# development. Yeah. So you get, the performance benefits. It's still hosted in Electron, but gosh, I think it'd be really interesting. The one thing I don't see happening is WPF and definitely WinForms moving to cross-platform.
Sure.
Mono kind of has got it to work, but both of those are so deeply tied into the way that Windows desktop UI works. It's all HWinds under the hood, and it's just, there are things that just don't exist on Linux, and so they're never going to work well. So I could see, and I don't know if it comes from Microsoft or if it's projects like Avalonia or something, there's no reason why we couldn't have a good, .NET based GTK Sharp, whatever it is. There's no reason we couldn't have a good cross-platform UI layer. I just know from everybody at Microsoft that I've talked to, they're like, it's a lot of work and we don't have a plan for it.
Sure. I've been banging the drum a little bit with everything should be web based, because I've been asked, have you got an app on mobile devices for your podcast? And well, if I was going to do that, I'd probably do it as a progressive web app.
Yeah.
And maybe, if you go and build a web application, you're cross-platform straight away. So maybe at some point we'll probably see the death of proper GUIs.
It's hard though. I agree. So I really like the promise of cross-platform web. There's just so much. Anybody that ships a platform wants a store, and they want a captive audience, and it's really hard to fight that. And it is like, it's just so easy for people to just say, oh, just get our app. Okay, I got your app. It's a very lightweight thing. Anytime you buy like some connected device, they'll always say like, here's how to install it. Download our app. It's like, why do I need your app to hook my scale up to Wi-Fi? But, so
that was one of the things. I bought some Bose headphones, and it was like, oh, get the Bose app. And I was like, the headphones? Right, okay. And then I got another pair, and it's like, you really should get him. And I was like, okay. Right. So I downloaded it. This gave me absolutely nothing apart from Bose listening to what I was listening to.
There's some PM that gets, like a little pay bump every time there's a 10,000 more downloads. I do see, like, if we're going to do some kind of cross-platform .NET UI, I think it'd be cool to have something like Blazor. If you got HTML and CSS and C# and it runs everywhere, and fine, make it a desktop. It was neat back in the day with Silverlight. You could do desktop. Yeah. You could install as a desktop app, and that was pretty slick when it worked.
so maybe we're looking at Windows Vista desktop widgets, Big
there
Brother, maybe. It's growing up a little bit as a full application rather than just a clock and a calendar and a random picture it found on the internet. We see a lot of drum beating about Core and the fact that it's open source software, sort of straight up. What are the real benefits to it being open source? Can anybody come along and make changes and update and fix code in Core?
I know I have, so I know it's possible.
There you go.
No big contributions, but very early in the HTTP client factory story, I kind of just saw that repo appear on the ASP.NET GitHub site, and it looked interesting, and I kind of thought, okay, what are these guys up to now? And for me, that's always been the benefit of it going open source, is I can go and see what's being developed. I can see if it might be useful to me, and then I can stick some comments into an issue and just say, this is how I would use it, or this is my scenario. And if you get in there early enough and you're open to giving those kind of suggestions, then the team can take that on board, because we all know as we're developing software, it's really hard when the engineers are trying to work out what the story is and what the feature needs to be. It's so much better if you've got someone that's actively using it to come into the room. So for me, that was a great experience. I was able to give some particular suggestions about how I would see the poly integration working that the team worked in. I think I sort of did the straw man code, and then Ryan Nowak made it a lot better. But in principle, you can contribute that way. I know I've gone in and made small PRs to changes. But I think just having it out there, just having it visible to you is a big plus point. And I encourage a lot of the developers that I'm talking to kind of go and look at the code. It's not just good to see what they're doing, but it's also a great learning exercise. I've learned a lot about writing good code, because this has gone through a good rigorous review process. So particularly for new developers, you can learn a lot just from reading experienced code. I think that's a big benefit.
Yeah, I think Steve's really locked in on probably the most important point is the visibility. Even if you're not going to be in there changing the code, even if you're not going to be forking the repo, just being able to watch the code, watch the issues, watch two engineers at Microsoft arguing with each other. It's in public, and that's good, that's healthy. So being able to see what's happening and participate all through the process is really, I think, one of the most important parts. There are other things, though. It is great that you can, because the license is open source, you don't have to worry if Microsoft gets bored with a project. It's still out there under an open license. You can use it. Your business can, if your business is depending on it, you've got the source code. It's great that other companies, Samsung, whoever, going out and building things and shipping it, they've got open source code. They can fork it and build. And then it's really neat that, Matt Warren, I think he's here in the UK. He's done a series of blog posts every year where he looks at opensource.net, and he looks at the contributions that are external to Microsoft, and there's a lot of repos that are mostly community contributions, which is awesome. Like, and so like looking at, there's repos that are 60, 70% non-Microsoft. And, you look at somebody like Ben Adams, who's just torn apart the performance world on .NET Core. Like and he's gotten other people involved, and there's a lot of people that are like pushing this forward. That didn't come from Microsoft, and it's amazing to see like how the impact of open source developers from, just filing issues to all the way through making pivotal pull requests to getting involved in like pushing for feature changes. It's dramatically changed what .NET Core is. So I understand that it might just sound like rah-rah kind of stuff, but get involved, watch the repos, watch the issues as they're changing. It's totally different.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's interesting for me. I've worked at Microsoft almost 10 years. It was really hard for me to get access to code or any kind of like bug trackers as a Microsoft employee. I couldn't get access to stuff. Sometimes it would just take so much work, so many emails, I'd just give up. And now I don't need anyone's permission. You don't need anyone's permission. It's cool.
Yeah. I remember quite a long time ago with the Ajax framework that there was a problem with it, and it was critical to the application we were working on at the time. And if it had been in GitHub or something, an equivalent of that back then, that it would have been fantastic, because what we ended up doing is that we had to decompile it, find the bug, fix the code, recompile it as our temporary version, because Microsoft weren't running at a decent cadence to actually say, we found this bug, it'll be fixed in the next month or so. Right. It was sort of 6 months later, this bug got fixed. And what I did then is when it got fixed, because I saw it in the release notes, I went and looked how they fixed it, and it was a case of, they fixed it the same way that I did. But if it had been open source software, I could have pushed that and gone, I fixed this for you. It's already done it. And that would have been really good. Yeah. So, I quite like that. And you sort of said, going and looking at code and how it's evolving, I think makes you a better developer, because you see these people who are much smarter than I am, fixing and building these new systems. So you sort of learn from the better developers out there.
I learn a lot just from reading David Fowler's code reviews on PRs. When you look through and he's picking out all the little points and you think, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And some of it I still don't understand, but that's fine.
That's all of us.
Yeah. It sounds like an exciting read for a Saturday evening.
Settle down with some pull requests by the fire.
So for the most part, .NET Core is a write once and run everywhere, with some caveats on it. But with some of the deviations that are coming up, are we at risk of sort of slipping back into the confusing world that we had of framework, where it became a case of, is this full framework? Is it compact framework? Is it 1.1? Is it 3.5? Is this mono, 32-bit, 64-bit? Are we slipping back into DLL hell with having all these different packages that we need? Because really, at the moment, .NET Core is a case of, is it written to the .NET standard? Yes or no? If it is, fantastic, I'll use it. So I guess the question is, are we looking at maybe getting a more confusing environment for developers?
Well, I mean, writing code that runs on many different platforms, it's not going to be straightforward always. But I do feel like .NET Standard is really kind of the best approach to that. And the idea is anything reusable, anything that you may want to use on multiple different platforms, .NET Standard is what that's for. It's for library code that's reusable. So anything that you are doing, if you target, if you're shipping a NuGet package, if you're building a JSON parser that people are going to use on, their Raspberry Pis and their Macs and their containers, well, ship it in .NET Standard, and there you go. There are all these, when you get into actually shipping packages and supporting different frameworks, there's all these kind of hidden quarters and different things. But I do feel like that's kind of where we're moving with that. So I feel like more the question is, or what we're requiring developers to do now is think about my code is going to run on multiple different platforms and just kind of plan for that.
Sure.
Yeah, we certainly taken the approach very early on that as soon as the standard was announced that we would try and sort of build any new libraries that we might want to share in that. And then we got our sort of main platforms upgraded to 4.7 so that they could then start targeting standard libraries. And that's been kind of like the halfway house until recently, and now we're sort of in the, okay, now we're going to break services out, and now we're going to do the other bits. But that's a good starting point, just to have that common code that you can share. And it was pretty smooth for us. I don't think we had any major hiccups getting that working. And I certainly hope that we're not going to slip back just because we're starting to bring sort of Windows stuff in and doing the other bits. I think we've probably all learned as a lesson from the past. .NET Core is a fresh start and a chance to kind of take on board where we got to with .NET Framework, which wasn't a terrible place, but it had some limitations.
Yeah, sure.
I can't see us quickly slipping back into that.
Yeah, and as you said there, we got to learn from those pasts, because as they say in those who don't learn from their past, they're damned to repeat it.
Yeah.
So we'll move on and sort of talk about Blazor now. A couple of questions on that. We've got an upcoming episode with Jamie Taylor where we talk about Blazor, and not to give too much away in that episode, we mentioned that a lot of the stuff we're seeing at the moment is just the cool toys for Blazor. So like when HTML5 became the big thing, we saw Doom running in HTML5. And if you actually dug into it, no, it wasn't. It was JavaScript running a canvas that was running
right.
Doom. Is Blazor and WebAssembly a big thing for Microsoft? Are they committed to sort of like supporting that going forward, or is it just going to be one of these cool flash in the pans that's got no real sort of application?
What I've seen of it is it's been completely customer driven. And Microsoft is very slow and careful about committing to new products. Mm-hmm. And I've been a cheerleader just since I saw it, and like, wow, this is cool, and it's web standard, and it's .NET, what's not to like? And internally at Microsoft, there was a long process of making a case for it. Who's going to use it? What's the like? If we ship something, people expect 10 years of support. They expect a long-term, commitment, and so they're very, very slow and careful with it. So the first kind of committed thing was Blazor Components, which actually runs server side and is communicating, using SignalR with client side. So that was something that was a lot lower impact to commit to shipping. And then over time, the kind of client side stuff is, kind of more stuff that's still being shaken out as far as how can we do this in a way where we're not downloading too many megabytes, and all these DLLs, and how can we optimize for what's .NET, IL binaries, and what's WASM, and how do we optimize that? What I've seen as far as why I don't feel like it's just a flash in the pan and a neat toy is the component side to it. So one of the things that I've seen the industry moving towards in building on the front end complex client side applications is things like React and Angular's using components and Vue. Everything's very component based, and like the HTML primitives are nice and I like them. I feel like they've kind of served us well for a very long time, and I don't want that to go away. But I do feel like I do understand that people that are building more complex applications want to have components, and they want them, components as containers and components that can be reusable and can, like components are a lot more sane to build for than here's this giant page of all these elements communicating with global, method, all this stuff. So the hopefully shorter answer to this is I feel like that's the revolution that we didn't see in Blazor. The WebAssembly and all that stuff is neat, but the actual kind of C# component-based thing is something we haven't had for a while. It's something that desktop developers have wanted on the web for a long time. And for instance, talking to the Blazor team that did the workshop here, they said a lot of their people that were at this were not primarily web developers. They were desktop developers. They were developers that were like, hey, we need to build line of business applications. We're comfortable building with components. We've done web forms. We've done WinForms. MVC was a mess. We didn't want to mess with that stuff. We don't want to learn this HTML stuff. Just give us something simple. So, and talking to like component vendors, it was cool to see like Telerik shipping. They've just announced Telerik Blazor components. So that's something where it's hard to ship components for, web like HTML and CSS and JavaScript, but shipping a component, like you can sell components that are tested and work well together and plug in, and so I see that whole ecosystem of like, that's something people have wanted for a while, and I see Blazor kind of providing that.
True. I think one of the points that you made there was that not downloading everything to the user. Now, is that one of the reasons behind using Mono for Blazor, because it's smaller or that it has more supported APIs? What do you know what the active choice behind that was?
My understanding, and some of this is just reading things into it, when it was originally the original prototype that Steve Sanderson showed was using this thing called .NET Anywhere, which was a C library that was actually written, I think, by someone at Google, and it was unmaintained, and he kind of hacked it and got it to work. WebAssembly. You could compile C to WebAssembly, and this compiler was written in C, and so he made it work. Over time, Mono has been this platform that has run absolutely everywhere. Like, they had Mono running on your toaster long before everybody dreamed of .NET moving off of Windows, right? And so that was something where Mono has been something it's run on mobile, it's run lightweight, it's run all over the place, and so getting Mono to run in a browser is a lot easier than getting this whole even .NET Core to run in the browser. Where things actually shake out, the team is still figuring stuff out as far as, do we transpile more stuff? Because if you look at how it actually works, there's HTML that downloads JavaScript. The JavaScript pulls down this Mono.js. The Mono.js pulls down this MonoWASM, which is actually a virtual machine running Mono. And it pulls down all these DLLs that are actually .NET IL, and it's running this virtual machine and running it in your browser. They tried transpiling everything over to WASM, and they found that it was actually downloading like 100 megabytes. It was way too much. So, like, the balance, it's a total optimization thing. As far as what's going to run fast and what they're going to pull down. I could see all kinds of things, like streaming down the IL as you need it. I don't know, honestly. So I feel like a lot of it was like parts on the shelf. Here's what we've got this. Let's try this. It's a small team. It's actually just a few people. And so, what they're building and how it's going to shake out over time. Yeah. I'm honestly not sure.
taking JIT to the next level there, where you're actually downloading the library you need just as you need it.
I wouldn't be surprised. There you go.
Yeah. Cool. So I think the takeaway from today is that Framework's not going anywhere. It's still going to be supported. There's still going to be stuff coming out for it. But if you're a Framework developer, definitely get out there, look at Core. Core is so much better. If you've got any greenfield projects, go use Core if you're allowed, if your company will allow it. Because I know that some businesses are still very scared of using open source. We can't touch that.
What's interesting, though? Every business is using open source. They're using jQuery. They're using Angular. You're using open source. .NET Core, or a lot of .NET MVC is open source. Like, you're using open source. You just don't want to admit it.
Yeah. And Blazor is definitely something to go and have a play with, because that could be the next big thing that we're all building. We're not building any Razor applications anymore. We're back to WinForms, and it's running everywhere. So just that leaves me to thank you both for coming on today and spending time out and away from the conference.
No, thank you for having us. Yeah.
And thank you to everyone out there for listening to The Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Jon Galloway and Steve Gordon talking about the future of .NET. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website, where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.